So when we look closely at Russia's economy, there is a lot happening. But there are two particular developments unfolding simultaneously, to me, that together tell a particular story about why the Kremlin absolutely does not want the world to recognize them. You see, on the one hand, Moscow has quietly begun selling off parts of its gold reserves. Not pledging them, not reorganizing them, selling them outright. But on the other hand, Russia's wealthiest elites, the same oligarchs who sit at the very top of the system, have spent the past several years doing the complete opposite. They've been buying extraordinary quantities of gold for themselves. Enough that some people argue would distort global prices even more than we've seen in recent months. So at first glance, these trends are contradictory. Why would the state be liquidating gold while its inner circle is hoarding it? So you have to peel back one layer and then another, because the contradiction, after a while, disappears. In fact, you see, these two developments fit perfectly together. Once you see how they fit, you get a stark reality, a stark picture of where Russia's economy really is, where its war effort is heading, and how the Kremlin can no longer keep this going, but will say that it has complete command. So in this video, I wanted to unpack exactly what Russia is selling, in terms of why it's doing this with its gold, why its elites are buying it, but why both groups, quietly, privately, are signaling a far darker economic reality than official narratives would ever, of course, admit. Stick around for this one. It's pretty interesting.
This is The Global Gambit.
How you going, everyone? Welcome back to The Global Gambit, where if you're new here, we focus on the intersection of geopolitics, international relations, and economic statecraft, and here to break down the geopolitical stories that actually shape the world behind the headlines. There's a particular emphasis on the Russian-Ukraine war right now, and that's what we will be covering this time, coming to you from the middle of Regent's Park, London, as it's pretty crazy. And for the first time in its history, you see Russia's central bank is selling off its gold reserves. You might initially think, well, so what? It doesn't really matter, does it? But it does signal a fundamental shift, a mindset change in the powers that be on how money is utilized and the insurance of stability in the most basic and famous of physical things, gold. But before getting properly into it, of course, I have my question for you guys. How resilient, how flexible is Russia's economy? We talk about it a lot with Konstantin and others, but I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. So firstly, let's start with the oligarchs. For years, Russia's richest individuals have been converting their ruble-based wealth into hard assets, physical assets, and gold, as always, has been at the top of that list. Now, why? Well, because you see, gold is the one thing that the Kremlin can't freeze. It can't misplace. It can't replace with any sort of IOU if things go askew. And crucially, it's the one asset that still holds value even if the Russian state collapses. Now, publicly, these same elites, the Siloviki, if you like, have spent years telling ordinary Russians that everything was fine. GDP is rising, sanctions barely matter, they will never make a difference. Russia was outperforming expectations. But privately, they have been liquidating rubles, selling properties abroad before they could be seized, dumping vulnerable assets, and buying tons of gold. That behavior alone tells you far more about their confidence than any press conference or official government statement will. This isn't emotional, it isn't about patriotism. It's the clearest signal possible from Russia's most financially literate individuals. We do not trust the future of the ruble, and by extension, therefore, the Russian economy, and by extension, therefore, Putin's regime and direction of the war. And they act accordingly. They are pragmatic. But let's flip the script and But now let's flip the script to talk about the gold, because this is where things get really interesting. While the oligarchs buy that gold, the Russian state begins doing the opposite. Moscow has started selling gold from its national wealth fund, the war chest it spent years building up in preparation, many believe, for the full-scale invasion in 2022. So it's extremely revealing. Countries usually sell gold for one reason only. They're running out of alternatives. You can print money, of course, but you get inflation spikes, you get hiked interest rates, and growth either stagnates or completely deteriorates. You essentially burn through fiscal buffers. You hit the wall, and Russia has hit that wall many times over. What makes this moment uniquely significant, though, is who the Kremlin is selling the gold to. Like you, I would have believed it was China. It's not China. It's not global markets. It's not sovereign buyers. It's the oligarchs, the same people who already moved their wealth out of the ruble years ago. It's a bit of a weird situation. But in other words, the state is swapping its gold for their rubles, the rubles that the oligarchs don't want and the international markets won't touch. Rubles that have nowhere left to go. That's not a normal economic activity. It's a last-ditch liquidity manoeuvre. And therefore, it tells us two things. One, the government is desperate for cash. And two, the elites see no future, as I've said, in holding Russian currency. Those two truths together are devastating, collectively. Sounds a bit like, in what English we could say, a bit of a circle jerk. You sell yourself to the other part, it's all going round largely in its interior. There's no external influence here. Now, before continuing, I just wanted to pause to say that this video is brought to you by, well, you actually. You see, because over the past year, this channel has nearly tripled in size, very much to you guys growing in the community, being part of here, and adding your own thoughts in the comments. And as we're on the cusp of 100,000, it's even more insane. Indeed, my goal with the channel is to try to offer more unusual take, a more nuanced approach from simply being Western or non-Western. There's a lot of channels that are simply pro-Putin, or others that mainly focus on the Ukrainian perspective, and I like to bring it all together, considering that I have a mixture of both. And if you find that interesting, using my professional background to try to talk through the noise, then do consider subscribing or leaving a comment or sharing it with other people. And I look forward to 2026 for many more important coverages. But now back to Russia's, what I would say is a reverse gold rush, perhaps? Sounds quite good. Now let's understand why selling gold is a red line. You see, selling hard assets for any government, any economy, isn't something you do lightly. Because once you start, the bottom of that barrel, the reserves, become pretty visible in terms of their limitations. You only have so much gold, and Russia has already burned through a significant proportion of it. The National Wealth Fund gold holdings have dropped from about 400 tons to just under 180. That's a collapse of roughly 57%. Before the invasion, that gold was considered untouchable and one of Russia's biggest comparative advantages. But now, according to recent intelligence assessments, the central bank may sell up to 230 tons of it, worth about $30 billion, and then a further 115 tons next year, about $15 billion. These are enormous liquidation figures for a country already running low on liquid reserves, and something that I've covered already in terms of what the budget will look like for the next 3 years and when Russia's going to get its money from. So why does it matter globally, though? Because long before you run out of gold, markets start believing and behaving as if you've already run out. Confidence evaporates, liquidity dries up, debt obligations spike, and critically, Russia becomes more dependent on asset sales rather than income, a shift that almost always signals the narrowing of a government's already pretty bad financial options. And the state therefore faces an impossible choice. Print more money and risk runaway inflation, which they don't have a control on anyway, or cut spending and risk internal political instability. Now, Russia has leaned and learned on the limits of the first option. Inflation has eaten into the wages. Interest rates have soared. And every sort of quiet printing operation has stolen a bit more purchasing power from ordinary Russians, particularly rural ones. Point being is that even autocracies know that people will notice. When inflation becomes a political problem, not just an economic one, then the Kremlin must pull the emergency brake if it hasn't got jammed already. And this is where the global context therefore sharpens the picture. Emerging market central banks have been purchasing gold at record levels, partly because of G7 discussions over confiscating Russia's $300 billion in frozen sovereign assets, $243 billion of which are held in Europe. I.e., Russia is selling gold into a world where everyone else is buying it, not because they want to, but because they have no alternative. That's exactly what selling gold is. It's the final lever they can pull before printing becomes outright dangerous and you leave from more of a sort of stagnant economy, as we saw in the 70s amongst parts of Europe, to just super hyperinflation. So the consequences of Moscow's fears are about a recruitment collapse. You see, there's a second consequence here, and this is the part that breaks the long-term war effort. Putin's entire strategy for sustaining the invasion of Ukraine has relied on paying extremely high military salaries and even higher death benefits. These can be in the realms of several thousands of USD, which is completely out of the realm of Russia, per month. These payments have made service not just attractive, but absolutely crucial to avoid mass conscription and ensure that the war machine goes. But if that money runs out, then what happens next? You can't recruit people for a grinding war with lower pay, weaker benefits, and the continually higher casualty rates where taking a city of 60,000 is costing double that in troop numbers. So if Kremlin can't buy soldiers, it has one alternative: force them. And that's the scenario Putin has always avoided. Because forced mobilization in full scale risks exactly what Putin and the Kremlin fear most: that internal stability. When Russia sells gold to keep paying inflated salaries, it isn't funding the war, it's funding the politics needed to allow the war to continue, for his legitimization and reputation to remain. So once gold runs out, recruitment cracks appear. Once recruitment cracks appear, battlefield pressure increases. And once battlefield pressure increases, Moscow begins looking for compromise terms disguised as victory. We've seen that already in the early signs of these peace negotiations and the fact that Russia hasn't really jumped on the bandwagon like Ukraine has, mainly because it doesn't have to, but also because Putin's wary of this longer-term issue. So now let's bring the two halves together. Oligarchs buying gold is a vote of no confidence in Russia's future. The Kremlin selling gold is an admission that it has no other financial levers left to pull. Those two signals, when they appear at the same time, always point to the same conclusion: a system approaching the limitations of its endurance, of its resilience, which I think we can agree has been more than many expected. Russia is not on the brink of collapse. That's too simplistic and something that I avoid on this channel. But it is running out of safe economic maneuvers. The war chest is largely depleted. Fiscal buffers are evaporating. Inflation politically sensitive, and recruitment incentives, the one biggest element sustaining it on the war front, becoming even more unsustainable. So elite confidence, the confidence that matters most for Putin, is drying up. So you see why the gold story matters. Not because gold itself determines the war, but because gold as a physical asset is the final undisguised indicator of a state's true financial stress. The Kremlin is telling the world, not through speeches or propaganda, but through its policy, through its undisclosed, unannounced actions, that its room for maneuver is shrinking, and that the oligarchs are responding exactly as you'd expect. They're getting out before the music stops. Now, if you found this breakdown helpful, do consider subscribing. It's free, it supports this independent analysis and enables the channel to keep growing and for me to diversify where I bring you these takes from. And if you like this story even more, or my approach to things, then you can find links in the description to support me with, say, a coffee. I could certainly do it after standing out here for the past 35 minutes. It's always takes longer to record these. If you want to see bloopers as well, then maybe I'll start posting those to members or patrons, which you can also become below. But we'll see you all in the next one. Take care, everyone.